Imagine a nation gripped by war, yet the roar of the crowd still echoed. On the frozen fields amidst the rationing and uncertainty, a different kind of battle was being waged. This isn't a story about the front lines, but on the gridiron. The improbable 1943 National Football League season, culminating in a championship victory by the legendary Chicago Bears. Welcome to the Pig Pen and the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, where we delve into the forgotten and fascinating corners of football history. Tonight, we journey back into a time unlike any other, exploring the gritty resilience of the 1943 National Football League season. With rosters depleted by the draft and a weight of the world heavy on their shoulders, the Chicago Bears, led by their iconic staff and coaches, defied the odds. This is the story of their improbable journey, a testament to the enduring spirit of the game and a championship forged in the shadow of global conflict. Get ready to uncover the tales of the makeshift teams, wartime heroes on the field, and the Chicago Bears' remarkable triumph in a season the world would never forget.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to another edition of our championship series. Here in 2025, we were talking about all the pre-Super Bowl National Football League championships. And today, we are up to the year of 1943. And as always, we are bringing in a guest expert from the team that won the championship that year. And today, we have a man that's titled Chicago's historian, Chicago sports historian, I'm sorry. And so that is a perfectly applicable thing to have here as we talk about this 1943 season. His name is Jack Silverstein. Jack, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Darren.
Yeah, Jack, we're get to talk a little bit about what some of the things that you do as far as sports history near the end. We'll do it a little along the way there. Yeah, so you got a couple books over your shoulders there that we'll talk about that and some of the other items you do here in a little bit. But you know, this 1943 National Football League season is really an incredible season, and we're really glad that you're here to join us and tell us a little bit about the season, the players, and the team that won it.
Yeah, definitely. So 1943, let's set the stage. And the big piece is World War II. So
that's a big one.
that's a big one, and I think it's the most important place to begin because I don't think anyone would be surprised to know that the NFL incurred heavy personnel losses. I'll say temporary losses in terms of players joining the armed forces, and that was a huge part of the story in 1943. Lots of players gone. I've seen different numbers, but I've seen that 638 players ultimately fought in World War II. By the end of the 1944 season, so 1 year after what we're talking about, 79% of players from 1941 were out of the league and fighting in the war. So a huge mass of talent that was drained out of the league. And this was also at a time where the NFL was not allowing black players to play. So you've got a huge mass of players who otherwise would be in the league, who were playing in semi-pro leagues, a lot out west. That included the big UCLA backfield trio of Kenny Washington, Woody Strode, and Jackie Robinson, all of whom would have been in the NFL but for that policy. And so you really have a lot of players who could be playing who are not. And that really sets the stage, big picture, for the 43 season. Specifically for this game, we've got the Bears, who are the team of the 40s so far, and we've got Washington, and these two teams really went back at this point. So they had hooked up this was their fourth championship battle between the two teams since 1937. It was their third of the last 4 years. So Washington won in 37 behind rookie Sammy Baugh, which led George Halas to do everything he could to acquire Columbia quarterback Sid Luckman in the NFL draft in 1939, trading a pick, playing his general manager role to a T. And to a T is a perfect word here because the Bears used the T formation. Many other teams did not, but in 1940, the Bears famously brought in Clark Shaughnessy, who George Halas knew from the Chicago area. He had coached at University of Chicago, and he was at Stanford, completely revamping their program, a Rose Bowl victory. And he brought Clark Shaughnessy in before the 1940 NFL championship game to revamp the T formation, adding the man in motion. And we know what happened there. This is really the big bang of NFL offenses, the 1940 championship game with the Bears winning 73-0. And from that point, the T formation began to spread throughout the NFL and throughout colleges, including from Clark Shaughnessy himself going and consulting with other teams. It is the basis for his very strong Pro Football Hall of Fame case, the ability to go team to team and install the T, but also just people having seen this performance in the 1940 championship game and saying, well, this is the offense. This is what we have to do. So the Bears, I always note, it's so funny. I don't know if it's funny. It makes me sad. But the Bears, having had so much trouble with their quarterback position forever, but forever really just goes back to about 1950, because prior to that, the Bears were the innovator. They were the cutting edge team. There were other teams with great quarterbacking, the Packers in particular with Arnie Herber and then Cecil Isbell, and Sammy Baugh doing his thing and starting in 37. But the Bears as an organization really were incredibly innovative with the passing game, and everybody saw it in 1940. The Bears followed that up with just a spectacular 1941 campaign, another championship, and it was during this season that Pearl Harbor happened. And now we've got the beginning of, the seeds, obviously, of America's involvement in World War II. George Halas, who had been in the Navy prior to coming to Decatur, prior to everything with what became the NFL, he'd been in the Navy, played at the Great Lakes Naval Academy, and he said that when the announcement came at Comiskey Park on December 7th, 1941, in the game between the Bears and the Cardinals, that the United States had been attacked, that he decided right then and there to re-enlist, which he did in 1942. So the Bears won the title in 1940. They win the title in 1941. They go undefeated in 1942. And who do they get at the end of the road? They get Washington again, and Washington clips the Bears 14-6. The Bears were undefeated, going for the three-peat. It was, again, sadly, the second time that had happened, because in 1934, the Bears were undefeated, going for the three-peat, and got blown out of the water by the New York Giants. So the Bears, the Giants, the team that was the Boston Braves became the Boston Redskins, became the Washington Redskins, and then the Packers on the rise. We were starting to see those traditional power, what we think of as traditional powers, really taking shape. So 1942, the Bears lose the championship game. And Sid Luckman, at this point, first of all, he had considered not playing in the NFL because his family had a profitable trucking business. So coming out of Columbia, he had at least said he possibly wasn't going to play. And by the end of 42, he felt like he had proven everything that he had to prove. He had shown that he could do it. He'd shown he could do it at a high level. He was a multi-time champion. He was an all-pro. And he was thinking about not playing. And obviously, thank goodness that he did, because the Bears season in 1943 and his season in 1943 would go down as historically one of the greatest passing seasons of all time. I think something that's interesting about the 43 season is that you've got all these great players who are missing because they're in war, but this was really the first time in the NFL that you could say the quarterback is always going to make the difference, because Sid Luckman kept the Bears at the top. Sammy Baugh kept Washington at the top. And the Bears are doing this in 43 without George Halas. As I said, George Halas re-enlisted into the Navy in 1942. And as a result, two coaches took over officially as co-coaches, Hunk Anderson and Luke Johnsos. And Patty Driscoll was really a third. He was really like the third coach, but he wasn't officially credited. And so the Bears go undefeated in 1942 and lose the championship game. So you enter 1943. Hunk Anderson and Luke Johnsos want to prove that they can win without George Halas. You know, they took this incredible dynamo and this juggernaut and dropped the title game. Sid Luckman wants to prove that he can rebound after his bad game in the 42 title game. Sammy Baugh wants to help Washington become back-to-back champs and really get back on top of the Bears. And the Bears are going to do all this with many players missing.
Yeah, wow. I'll tell you what, I guess it's not a bad thing when Halas, a Hall of Famer, leaves and you have a couple other Hall of Famers that are stepping in to, and football legends with Driscoll and Hunk Anderson and the other gentleman, I forget who you said the other one was.
Luke Johnsos.
Luke Johnsos. But we know those guys are, definitely legends of the game and know the game because they were such outstanding players during their careers.
Yeah, 100%. So this was a coaching staff that was very tight-knit. Luke Johnsos is credited as being the first coach who was up in the booth instead of down on the field, relaying plays in, talking to Halas on the headset, talking to Hunk Anderson, and or not the headset, but with the telephone that went from the booth down to the field. To give you an idea of the players who just the Bears lost since the start of the war, halfback Hugh Gallinaro went to the Marines. Ken Kavanaugh, the elusive deep threat end, went to the Air Force. The Navy pulled away one play McAfee, George McAfee, the future Hall of Famer, Joe Stidehar, the future Hall of Fame tackle, George Halas, obviously we mentioned, a young back named Young Bussey, who was in 1945 became the only Bears player to die in World War II. The bruising fullback Norm Stanley went into the Army, and a man named Charlie O'Rourke went to the Navy. O'Rourke is significant because he came to the Bears in 1942 after taking the 41 season off. George Halas really pursued him hard, gave him a huge contract, and O'Rourke came in 42. This was a time when you didn't just have one quarterback playing, and there would be substitutions, and then once you sub, you're out. It's an 11-man game. This is before the free substitution rule. And Charlie O'Rourke, or Chuck and Charlie O'Rourke as he was known, set a Bears rookie record with 11 touchdown passes, and that wasn't passed until this past season when Caleb Williams broke his record. So that's how long that record stood. And it's important to recognize that, because Charlie O'Rourke then going into the Navy, now Sid Luckman is like, he wasn't outshined, but he didn't have a good game against Washington in the 42 title game, but O'Rourke did. And O'Rourke, despite having way fewer pass attempts than Luckman, had more touchdown passes than him in 42. So this is all factoring into what Sid Luckman is going to do in 43. Two other notes on players, just kind of like weird occurrences because of how player contracts were. In that 1943 championship game, the Bears had end Jim Benton, who is right on the cusp of the Hall of Fame, but he played most of his career with the Rams. So Jim Benton played with the Rams from 38 to 40, and then again in 42, and then again from 44 to 47. He only played 1 year with the Bears, but it was 1943 in this championship season. And then over on the other side, tackle Lou Rimkus, who also probably not as close to the Hall, as Benton. I don't know. I guess some people would debate that. Certainly some of the historians I talk to love Lou Rimkus as a possible Hall candidate. But what's interesting here is that he played with Washington as a rookie in 43, then went off to the armed forces, 44, 45, and then he returned in 1946 with the AAFC's new Cleveland Browns. And that's where he played the remainder of his career, won 5 championships, and that's where he's known. So it's funny to look at the sheet and look at the starting lineups and see Lou Rimkus in Washington and see Jim Benton, which I knew as a Bears historian, Jim Benton here with the Bears, when these guys are definitely not known for those teams. But if you want, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just a lot of what you're talking about. I mean, this World War II in the professional football and even college football is such a line of demarcation of a transition of the game changing. I mean, it's definitely a milestone moment, and this is probably the pinnacle year. You know, not only with Shaughnessy and with the help of Hallis getting the T formation to replace the single wing and double wing formations that have been used for a couple of decades. Put on display and made famous by Pop Warner, but also the substitution, which you alluded to. Now we're going to see that in coming years because of these deprivation of having players to get out there, and they've been playing single platoon football forever. Now they're going to get to have substitution, and you're going to have a plethora of players coming back when guys are coming back from the war too. And there's so many items that are happening here, and the players are getting trained while they're in military. That's part of their military training is playing a game of football. So they're honing their craft overseas and against other college stars and professional stars, and really made a humongous difference. And it really, I think, helped people as they got together. Because before that, it was like anybody from Illinois, played against people from Illinois and the Midwest. So people out east, they played mainly against people in east, except for the NFL. But now they're going in, they're in the same training camps and military bases. They're exchanging ideas, coming up with new concepts, and it's really a melting pot especially for the NFL. It really helped promote pro football quite a bit. So I think it's a really interesting time for that. Now you're touching so many of those aspects just looking at it through the lens of the Bears championship of 43.
Yeah, definitely. And Darren, you mentioned the way that players are getting to know each other on these other bases. September of 1942, there was a charity game to again promote pro football, the Bears versus Army, and you had Chuck and Charlie O'Rourke playing for the Bears, and you had ex-Bear Norm Stanley playing for the Army team. So you definitely had all of these elements of different waves of ball, and the Great Lakes Naval Station that I had mentioned earlier, where Hallis played with Jimmy Conzelman and Patty Driscoll, who we've mentioned. Mm-hmm. That's going strong in the 40s with Coach Paul Brown. So it's definitely all looping together, and
Marion Motley, and there's a lot of them coming out of this.
Yes, absolutely. And so there's a lot there, and it was pretty amazing that the NFL was able to sustain itself during World War II, because there were certain teams that obviously we know couldn't do that. We had the famous Steagles team of 1943. That's this season, where you had the Philadelphia Eagles and the Pittsburgh Steelers join operations as Pittville, but they became known as the Steagles. And then the next year, Card Pitt, the Cardinals and the Steelers, they came together. So it was not really clear how the NFL was going to proceed in the face of war, not having the same history that Major League Baseball had, where the fan base is really much stronger still in baseball than in football. The All-American Football Conference, which would ultimately debut in 1946, they were supposed to come out earlier and couldn't. So yeah, World War II definitely casts a shadow over, everything in American life, obviously in the 40s, and that includes the National Football League.
Yeah, it's just amazing how all those aspects sort of came together. I mean, I think it was, like you said, the war definitely was the impetus that sort of stirred it on. But I think a lot of these things were just building up, and it just happened to be that sort of that break. You know, there's a, if you want to call it a break, because a lot of players, like you said earlier, weren't in the NFL because they were off to war. But just that little break, and then we come back. It's almost like a reset button, and it's a whole new game. It had to be an amazing time to be a football fan to watch that, and just that transition happening so drastically.
Absolutely. So there's one more player who, when you talk about the 1943 Bears and the 1943 championship, there's one more player who jumps out who you have to talk about, and that is Bronco Nagurski.
Mm-hmm.
Because with all of the players who were in the war, the Bears needed more talent, and they call their old legend, Bronco Nagurski, who had been retired after the 37 season, a short career because Hallis wouldn't pay him. He was also making a lot of money wrestling, and they call Nagurski and they get him back over. And I want to read you a few quotes to give listeners just an idea
Yeah,
of
please.
what Nagurski was about. This is from the 1952 NFL Encyclopedia, and Nagurski had been a backfield star with the Bears in their championship years in the 30s, in the early 30s. So 32, 33, and then the undefeated team that I mentioned that didn't win.
You're part of that famous pass in the 32 de facto championship game that was still controversial to this day.
That's right. And the catcher of that pass, Red Grange. Here's Red Grange talking about Bronco Nagurski. There was something strange about tackling Nagurski. When you hit him, it was almost like getting an electric shock. If you hit him above the ankles, you were likely to get killed. Here is Harry Newman from the Giants, or again, early 30s. He was 75% of an opposing team's worry. I was never hit so hard in my life as one time when I tried to stop him in the open field. I hit him as hard as I could, and all it did was throw him off pace a little. And one more quote from Giants coach Steve Owen. There's only one defense that could stop him. Shoot him before he leaves the dressing room. I love those. So Nagurski comes back in 43, but he's not going to be a fullback. He's going to be a tackle because he's not sure if he's going to be able to do this. But he's still such an imposing figure. I want to read you a few more quotes. And those are the guys in the early 30s who saw Nagurski in his prime. This is from the wonderful book, What a Game They Played, by Richard Whittingham. And if any of your listeners or viewers don't know Richard Whittingham, he did incredible work at gathering long form interviews with pro football players of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. But I mean, what's most vital is this stuff. So now you've got these guys, from the late 30s and the 40s. So Nagurski's final year was Sammy Baugh's rookie year. Sid Luckman entered the league when Nagurski was retired. So here is Sid Luckman. He says, when I first saw him, referring to Nagurski, when I first saw him, I saw the nearest thing to the most perfectly built, strongest human being I'd ever met. He had such tremendous power. He had played in the 30s, become a legend, and then he came back to training camp in 1943. The Bronc was 34 or 35 then and had been out of the game for about 6 years. His power came back to him. When I handed him the ball, I could sense the power. He would take it with just such a great burst as he went into the line. In one of the games against the Redskins, I was walking off the field with Sammy Baugh afterwards, and I said, Sammy, can you imagine what he must have been like in his prime? Sammy said, I remember. He was the most powerful human being I ever played against. So these are the best of the best.
That's quite a testament by some legends.
Right. Sammy Baugh, Sid Luckman, Red Grange. I mean, Harry Newman doesn't stack up with those guys, but a great player for his time. And Steve Owen. That's who Bronco Nagurski was. So he played tackle. The Bears then had a must-win game against the crosstown Chicago Cardinals at the end of the year. And the Bears-Cardinals series, incredible. I encourage everyone, if you want to learn more about it, to buy Joe Zimba's book on the Bears-Cardinals history. And, it seemed like every year in the 1940s, the Bears and the Cardinals, that end of the season game had huge stakes, and it swung a few championships. So we get to the end of the season, and Nagurski finally is going to play fullback. And it's the first time in the season, and so the first time since 37, that he's going to play fullback. The Bears trailed entering the fourth quarter 24-14 when Nagurski scored a 1-yard touchdown to trigger a comeback. The Bears outscored the Cardinals 21-0 in the fourth to win the game 35-24. Nagurski's only ground game of the season, 16 carries, 84 yards, and a touchdown, and he would carry the ball in the championship game. Screenwriter William Goldman of Chicago wrote the script for the movie Hearts in Atlantis, starring Anthony Hopkins, and gave Anthony Hopkins a speech where he tells a young boy about witnessing Bronco Nagurski's game in 1943 against the Cardinals. And I mean, if you've I've never seen Hearts in Atlantis, but this scene is so powerful and so beautiful. It's on YouTube. I encourage everyone to check it out if you want to see Anthony Hopkins recalling what it was like to watch Bronco Nagurski beat the Cardinals in 43 and then ultimately lead. They kind of compress some of the history in the retelling, and it's like the Cardinals game is the championship, which wasn't true. But the way that Goldman wrote this speech and the way that Anthony Hopkins delivers it, it really gives you a great sense of Nagurski's power, not just his physical power, but the power that he had existing in people's imagination. He was obviously one of the all-time greats of all-time greats, inaugural class of the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1963. There are definitely historians who don't view him as this like singular entity in terms of what he did on the field. Like he and Clark Hinkle had some absolute battles. But there was a myth that was well earned around Nagurski beyond his well-earned reputation of what he could actually do offensively and defensively. And I encourage anyone to watch that clip of Anthony Hopkins delivering this monologue of what it was like to see the way he says Nagurski. I can't do it because I can't imitate Anthony Hopkins. But
That wasn't bad though. That wasn't bad.
I appreciate that, Darren. So that's the mythology entering that 43 championship game, is now you've got Bronco Nagurski back.
Wow, that's tremendous. And like you said, the Redskins have been vying for championships along with the Bears, the Packers, and the Giants. They're this 4-team sort of dominating the NFL for the last almost decade and a half. One of those is winning the championship, except for the Lions snuck one in there. I believe they're in the early 30s. But just those are the teams that are really fending off each other and beating each other up between Chicago and the Packers in the West, and in the East you have the Redskins and the Giants just battling it out every year, and coming down, iron sharpening iron, and they're playing each other in the championship game once again. So that's tremendous.
Yeah. So let's talk though about Sid Luckman's 1943 season, because it's one of the greatest seasons. I think it is still one of the greatest seasons that's ever been. And statistically, it still has some oomph to it. He still holds a record from that season. But the way that I describe one second here, the way that I describe Luckman and versus Sammy Baugh is it's a little bit like Brady Peyton Manning in the mid 2000s, where one of them is like the passer and one of them is the winner. And actually we've seen that a lot in NFL history. We saw it 2 decades before with Montana and Marino. We saw it. Well, I guess Unitas really had sort of both parts. Some people really have both parts, but that's the best way I can describe it. Is
great comparisons. I love the analogies. Yeah.
And another way that I described it is like the 1998 home run chase, because you had Mark McGwire, who everybody knew was like the home run king. He's going to go after Roger Maris. And then you have Sammy Sosa, who pops in kind of out of nowhere. Now, Sid Luckman wasn't out of nowhere in 43. He was a two-time champion. But he was out of nowhere in the sense of posting these incredibly gaudy statistics. This was sort of like his Tom Brady 2007, where all of a sudden Tom Brady gets Randy Moss, Wes Welker, Dante Stallworth, and all of a sudden he's doing things that only Peyton Manning had done. Peyton Manning throws 49 touchdowns in 2004 for the new record, and now Tom Brady's going to come out and throw 50 touchdowns and downfield assault, and just incredible. And the stat that I love is 13.9%. Okay, 13.9%. That is Sid Luckman's touchdown percentage in 1943.
Wow.
He threw 28 touchdowns that season, which was a new record. And we know that now the record is held by Peyton Manning with 55 touchdowns in 2013. Now, obviously, this is a stretch because things wouldn't break exactly like this. But if Sid Luckman in 1943 at 13.9% had as many pass attempts as Peyton Manning did in 2013, when he set the record of 55 touchdowns, Sid Luckman at that percentage would have thrown 92 touchdowns.
Oh my cow. Jeez.
Again, that's not actually going to happen because there's a reason that you don't have that many pass attempts in 1943 and you can't just necessarily carry a percentage. But just as an example of how crazy that percentage is, I crunched those numbers at one point, and 92 scores is pretty remarkable.
I'd say.
Yeah.
His arm would probably fall off by then.
Right?
A lot of throws.
So you've got Sid Luckman and Sammy Baugh now duking it out for quarterback supremacy. Read you a few things here from my story in 2018 about Sid Luckman's 1943. Sammy Baugh entered the 43 season second all-time in passing yards, just 125 yards away from Cecil Isbell, and he was fourth all-time in passing touchdowns, just 10 away from Arnie Herber's record. So it looked like Sammy Baugh was going to have this incredible historic season, and he did. Every key passing category, Luckman and Baugh were 1-2 in one order or the other. And at the time, completion percentage was the stat that they used to say who was the passing champ. So Sammy Baugh was actually the passing champ of 1943. And of course, these guys are also playing defense, and they're also playing special teams. And they're both punters. They're sometimes returning kicks, which we'll get to shortly. They're playing defense. It's pretty remarkable. Let's go to the middle of the 43 season. The record for touchdown passes in a game was 5. And in week 7, in a 48-10 win over the Brooklyn Dodgers, Sammy Baugh threw 6 touchdowns and threw 376 passing yards. And both of those became single game records. So Sid Luckman's having this great season. Bears are having this great season. Sammy Baugh's having his great season. Washington's playing incredibly well. And Sammy Baugh goes out in week 7 and he sets the new record for touchdown passes in a game and passing yards in a game. And then we get to Sid Luckman, November 14th, 1943. Now he's also enlisted as a merchant marine, so he knows he's headed to war pretty soon. They're in the Polo Grounds playing the New York Giants. Sid Luckman from Erasmus High, Brooklyn boy, went to Columbia, so it's his home game. And Sid Luckman comes out and kills Sammy Baugh's very fresh record in a 56-7 win. Sid Luckman throws for 433 yards and 7 touchdowns.
Wow.
He's the first quarterback ever to throw 7 touchdowns. Now that has been tied. It has not been passed. He is the first quarterback in NFL history with a 400-yard game at 433 yards. I'll note that there have been publications that have shown that he had 453 yards. It was 433. I've tracked it out, and there are more instances of that. But yeah, Sid Luckman of the Chicago Bears, first quarterback to throw for 400 yards. And again, this one won't make you happy, Bears fans. He was the first one to do it in NFL history. We only have 3 since then, all separate players. And the last Bear to throw for 400 yards was Jim Miller, 422 yards in 1999, meaning the Bears do not have a 400-yard passing game this century. But we did have the first one, so I guess we can all hang our hats on that.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, all the way around, the good and the bad and the ugly of that. But back in that era, passing's, like you said earlier, passing is not the modus operandi of the National Football League. It is a running game, and teams want to run the ball more than they want to pass, except for the Packers and now the Bears with the T formation coming in.
Yep.
So that's astounding numbers even for today. Yeah, like you said, anybody would love to have a 400-yard pass, or any offense in modern NFL would love to have that for a game.
Yep. Now these were some pretty passes too. I mean, these weren't all. We had some deep throws, and these weren't all screens. And there's footage, and there's some great photos that were printed at the time. So Sid Luckman's 7 touchdown passes, 4 yards to Jim Benton, who we mentioned, his 1 year with the Bears. The Rams, great, but hell of a year to pick your only season to be with the Bears. 31 yards to Connie McBarry. That was a beauty over the shoulder. 27 yards to Hamp Poole. 62 yards to Harry Clark. 15 to Benton again. So Benton caught 2, 3 yards to George Wilson, and then finally 40 yards to Hamp Poole. You won't be surprised to know that the Bears place kicker that game, Bob Snyder, set an extra point record, tied an extra point record as well. So the Bears just steamroll the Giants, and then the very next week we get caught. 21-7 loss to Washington. Washington 6-0-1 after that game. The Bears 7-1-1, and the Bears season ended earlier. We then went and had the Cardinals. So this goes into this Cardinals game where we win 35-24, a must win because you had only 2 teams going to a championship game: the champion of the Western Division, where the Bears were, the champion of the Packers, and the champion of the Eastern Division, where Washington was, and the Giants. So the Bears lose to Washington, and then Washington goes out and completely falls apart. They lose 27-14 to the Steagles. Again, this team that was joined together from the Steelers and the Eagles. And then they lose 14-10 to the Giants on the road. They get the Giants again, and they lose 31-7 at home, and that sets up a playoff game. The Giants win that playoff game 28-0. And by the time the championship game is there, the Bears have been off for a month. So a big story leading into the 1943 championship game. It's funny, same as it ever was. The idea of who's ready, the layoff team or the team that's hot. Is it better to be rested? If you've had a long layoff, are you well rested or are you rusty? If you have just been playing, are you tired or are you do you have momentum? So that was the story going into the title game. And this championship game would be played at Wrigley Field, and the NFL championship game site was determined by alternating between the champions. So in odd years, the Western champ had the home game, and in even years, the Eastern champ had it. And that is why, again, a sad one for Bears fans, the 1934 championship, when we were undefeated, we had to go on the road to the Polo Grounds, and that's Sneakers game number 1. And then in 1956, a very good Bears team had to go on the road to the Giants, again the Polo Grounds, for Sneakers game number 2. And so you're alternating sites. So the Bears don't care, because the Bears have been alternating sites literally. This is their 4th straight year in the title game. 1940 in Washington, 41 at home, 42 back in Washington, 43 back at home.
Yeah, that's That's a dynamic that I don't think we fully appreciate today, because we know at the end of the year the Super Bowl's at a neutral site, except for the Rams playing a home game. But it's just any NFL team that has it's in their home stadium, you have an opportunity to. It's whether you take advantage of that or not. But but most of the Super Bowls have been neutral site, and you earn your home field advantage through the playoffs. Back then it's not that way, and it's the luck of the draw, so to speak, of, well, where who's going to have the choice of where to play. It's not always the case in the home team, because we had the Boston Redskins decide to play in a Polo Grounds for some reasons that they were sort of ticked at their fan base for not showing up, and they wanted a crowd draw. But normally you're playing at your home stadium, so that's an odd dynamic, especially so many times the team with the better record was traveling to play these championship games. So kind of an oddity, but definitely something that they had to face back then.
Yep. So we get to the championship game, and this one is not filled with drama. This is a game that Sid Luckman would later call the greatest game of his career. And to picture Sid Luckman is thinking this might be it. He thinks he's going to retire after this game. Remember, he's got the trucking company. Now, anything he had left to prove is out the window. He's just had the greatest passing season in NFL history, including the greatest passing game in NFL history, and a championship here, between enlisting in the Merchant Marines, the trucking business. The championship here is really going to ice it. So we go to the first quarter, and something people will notice if you take a look at the starting lineups is that neither Baugh nor Luckman started this game. And this was part of a coaching strategy that said, if you could do it, keep your quarterback on the bench to start, keep him next to your head coach, and the quarterback and the head coach watch how the first few series play out. Look, they get a view of the defense, they get a view what's working, field conditions, anything else, and then they send them in. So in the game between Sid Luckman and Sammy Baugh, which again, it's like a championship. It's like if the Super Bowl, this wouldn't have been possible because the same conference. But if Super Bowl 42 was between the Patriots and the Colts, and you've got Peyton Manning the year after he finally won a championship, so now he's a champion. He's removed that. Although Sammy Baugh obviously had come out and was a champion his rookie year, but you got Peyton Manning, who's a champion. You've got Tom Brady, who's now setting records. Basically, the two things that they didn't have, they now have. And now you're having a championship game. They didn't start. So the Bears started Bob Snyder, and Washington started Ray Hare. Neat little quirk. You look and you say, why didn't these guys start? That is the reason.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yep. So we've got a scoreless first quarter in what would end up being a shootout, and really a big Bears win. But again, we talk about guys going both ways. Now, here's something that Tom Brady and Peyton Manning are not going to do. Luckman is returning a punt. Sammy Baugh, the punter, is trying to tackle him. And Luckman steamrolls Sammy Baugh and knocks him out of the game with a concussion.
Wow.
Sammy Baugh said, I got whacked early in the game, knocked out. I couldn't remember anything. I begged with them, meaning the coaches and the trainers, to let him back in. He says, I pleaded with them to put me back in there. My head hurt, but I was all right. The coach didn't want to take a chance. So now Washington doesn't have their quarterback, and now it's just going to be an onslaught. Washington actually draws first blood. Outstanding back. Andy Farkas punches one in, a short one, and then the Bears turn it on. Luckman hits Harry Clark 31 yards for a touchdown. Bronco Nagurski now this is definitely going to be Nagurski's final game. Nagurski punches one in. The Bears lead 14-7 at the half. We go into the third quarter, and Luckman hits the shifty halfback Dante Magnani twice in the third for long touchdowns, a 36-yarder and a 66-yarder. Sammy Baugh comes back in the game. He gets one to Farkas for 17 and a score. There's a missed extra point in there, so the Bears after three lead 27-14. Luckman gets two more touchdown passes in the fourth, one to Benton for 26, one to Clark for 10. It's 41-14. The game is over. Washington gets one more touchdown for the final score of 41-21. And remember, coming into this season, the NFL record for touchdown passes in a game was 5. So here's Sid Luckman. It doesn't count on his season total. He still only counts, he still only gets 28 touchdown passes for 1943, but he comes into the title game. He throws 5 touchdown passes, which would have tied the record if he hadn't thrown the 7. And with respect, if Sammy Baugh hadn't thrown the 6. And he comes out, and this is why he calls this the greatest game of his career. I want to read you the facts and figures of this game, because one thing that we were seeing at this point, I said that baseball was still bigger than football, and that is true, but football is gaining. So here are the facts and figures. Attendance, 34,320. The gross gate receipts, 120,000, over 120,000. And what that meant was that the Bears' share was $37,086.98. So each player received $1,135.81, and each player on the losing team had just over $754. So those numbers are going to just go up and up. By the time the Bears are back in the title game just 3 years later, they're going to blow all those numbers out of the water. But this was a really big deal, winning this title. And, George Halas was not coaching. And so now Anderson and Janos, they get their win. Luckman gets the game ball. There's a great picture of Luckman and Nagurski and 2 other players celebrating. Nagurski's holding the game ball, but Luckman tells him, "This was my last game too, and I want this one to put among my souvenirs. I'll buy you a dozen footballs to have around the house, but this one I keep." So Sid Luckman definitely thought he was going to be retiring. And I mean, what a crazy season then he had the next year, where he storms the beaches of Normandy, June 6th, 1944, and then is still able to come back and still able to play at a high level. And that's just incredible. But I want to leave you with one final quote. Remember, George Halas is not coaching the Bears at this point. Obviously, still owns the team, still the general manager, and he's there. He's watching the game, and he says, quote, "The Bears played the perfect strategy today. They ran over the Redskins early in the game, gave them a terrific physical licking. Thus, they restored that old-time Bear terror, which hasn't always existed in the last couple of seasons." So, the Bear terror, and that's a beautiful one.
No, just a great season, and what a way to tell it. We really appreciate you telling this history of the season, and the Bears, and the talking about the players and their personalities and how they were respected throughout the NFL. And you do a lot of this. You're not the Chicago sports historian for nothing. You have some great projects going on. Maybe you could share with us some of your writing and where people can catch it at, and some of your podcasts.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm big in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I do a lot of work with Pro Football Hall of Fame voter Clark Judge on his wonderful site, Talk of Fame. I was just involved in a part of a group of 9 NFL historians who Clark spearheaded it, and we took it, and then we took it and ran with it to hold a meeting a couple of weeks ago to write a class of forgotten players from the 1920 season, the inaugural season of what became the NFL, to 1949, which was the end of the two-way era. And we wanted to recommend to voters, there are some real legitimate Hall of Famers who were left out. And the reason that they were left out is that the NFL began as the APFA in 1920, but the Pro Football Hall of Fame didn't start until 1963. So there were 43 seasons, and some of these guys, there were guys in that inaugural class who were from the 1920s. Ernie Nevers, Nagurski in the 30s, Red Grange, who played into the 30s, and some others. But there were guys who were forgotten. And so we've put together a historian committee, and have made a recommendation to voters of a class of Laverne Delweg from the Packers, Vern Llewellyn from the Packers, Ox Emerson, a guard, played for a few different teams, and Al Wistert, a tackle with the Eagles, and then Ralph Hay, league founder, and scout Eddie Kodal of the Rams, who's credited as the father of modern scouting. So we've got that, and we'll be doing another one of another class, which would be 1950 to 1969, which brings you to the end of the AFL. So a lot of cool Pro Football Hall of Fame things that I'm involved in. I'm also the author of Why We Root: Mad Obsessions of a Chicago Sports Fan. And this is a look back at the last 30 years of Chicago sports, give or take. Much better than we give it credit for, and a lot of terrible droughts broken by my Cubbies and by the White Sox, celebrating their 20th anniversary of that incredible season this year, and the Blackhawks getting off the schneid as well in 2010. So this is available anywhere you buy books, basically everywhere. And it doesn't matter where you cut it. I have a really good deal. My cut is great. So I know that people are always like, how can I support the author? Anywhere you buy this supports the author, because I own this book outright, and my cut is phenomenal. So I've got that. Some other pieces of NFL history. I uncovered the NFL's first full-time long snapper, a gentleman named George Berman, in 2020, and confirmed that he was the first player to hold a roster spot, basically just to be a long snapper. He was also an offensive lineman. But by the time he went to Washington in the early 1970s, he was there just a long snap. So I did that. I mentioned Charlie O'Rourke. Charlie O'Rourke's record was actually lost. The Bears thought that the record holder for rookies with most touchdown passes was Kyle Orton and Jim McMahon. I actually uncovered that it was Charlie O'Rourke, and did the legwork to get the Bears to put him back into their record book. So from in 2021, so his family was able to celebrate that, and I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad he no longer holds the record, because Caleb Williams, you don't want any rookie, you don't want any record to be from 1942. That's not great. So very, very happy about that, and a few other pieces here and there, working on a book on the 90s Bulls, and I've got a newsletter, readjack.substack.com, where I put all my history, all my interviews, all my research, and people can check that out. And the last thing I'll note is I knew a lot about the 1943 championship game already, but obviously for this, read more, got more into the newspaper archives, and the game is mostly on YouTube. And you can watch a lot of that 43 title game and see what these plays look like, see what these players look like, see how they move, see the speed, see Sid Luckman intercepting passes as a safety. So you should definitely go to YouTube, and there's a lot of old football on. If you haven't been on there yet, so you're on YouTube right now. You're watching the Pigskin Dispatch. You're here in the Pig Pen. You already care about the history of the game. I know you're already online watching this with Darren. So when this is over, and when you've listened to the entire series, go check out the 1943 championship game and many others. Drop whatever you can into the search bar, because there's a lot of great old footage on YouTube.
Jack, it's so refreshing to see somebody, you're younger than me, so I've loved seeing these younger generations like yourself really picking up the passion and preserving the football history like you are, and finding out things that maybe we've lost or forgotten and didn't realize, to recognize some of these folks. Like you said, the first long snapper, and the recognition for this passer of the Bears, and letting them recognize one of their own as holding a record for so long. So we really appreciate you doing that, and really appreciate you coming on here today and sharing that passion and Bears history with us to help win this series. And we'd like to have you back here in a couple weeks here when we go into another season that the Bears had, and we look forward to that. That's right. Bear down, as we say. Thank you so much for having me, Darren. This is great. And thank you for putting this series together and bringing so many historians together. And, it's definitely a forgotten part of history. We saw this
going into the Super Bowl this year with Kansas City going for the three-peat. And yes, they were the first team that was entering a Super Bowl and had a chance to three-peat just on Super Bowls. But they weren't the first team. I mean, obviously they lost, so they didn't do it. But they wouldn't have been the first team to three-peat because the Packers did it twice, actually. But they did it before the NFL Championship Series started. And then they did it in the final 2 years before Super Bowl one. And then the three-peat was the final year, and then Super Bowl one, and then Super Bowl two. So the Packers have 2 three-peats. But listen, there's a lot of history that predates.
And some may claim that in Eastern Ohio that the Canton Bulldogs did too. 1 year they were called the Cleveland Bulldogs with about half the roster. But
right.
So there's people, and they, Canton's got to hold on to something. They got the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but they want that three-peat too. So
they better get Ralph Hay in that Pro Football Hall of Fame. What are you doing, everybody?
Yeah, there you go.
If you want to pick up a tidy little volume on the history of the NFL championship game, this little guy right here, Jerry Eisenberg.
Yeah.
Little bitty.
Big name.
I've caught a few small errors here and there, but that's just what it is. But this little guy right here is terrific. And I recommend everybody check out thriftbooks.com, where there are great books, low price. I buy a ton of books on Thrift Books. They come with this little sticker, and I love them so much. And I'm not paid by Thrift Books, but I love them, and I'm just saying, Thrift Books.
All right, Jack. Well, we appreciate it, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Sounds great. Thanks, Darren.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.